Lauren Sánchez has always been a name surrounded by success mystery and high-profile headlines. But now with her wedding to Jeff Bezos dominating the news cycle, a former chapter from her life is quietly stepping into the spotlight, and it is one that has remained in the shadows for more than 2 decades. Former NFL star Anthony Miller, once engaged to Lauren, has finally decided to open up about their 4-year relationship that began in the late 1990s when Lauren was still a young sports reporter with big dreams and Miller was a household name playing for the Denver Broncos. Their love story started like something out of a movie: instant connection, shared goals, rising careers, and a chemistry that made them look like the perfect couple from the outside. But beneath the surface, according to Miller, things were never quite what they seemed. He recalls how Lauren was ambitious, focused, and supportive, always there when needed. But he also began to notice early red flags, especially around her attitude toward money and consistency. She earned well, but rarely paid for anything, he says, and there were moments when her stories did not fully add up. Her phone was guarded, her whereabouts were vague, and even her mood seemed to shift depending on who was watching. 2.5 years into their relationship, Lauren pushed for marriage and eventually they got engaged, but Miller later admitted he gave her the ring more out of pressure than pure passion. It was a decision he would later regret deeply. As the relationship progressed, his doubts grew, and eventually a moment came that changed everything. Miller says he discovered Lauren's diary purely by accident, and what he read confirmed his worst fears. According to him, the diary revealed multiple infidelities and a version of Lauren he never thought possible. After the breakup, he says more people came forward with stories, things they had held back while they were together, confirming what he had tried to ignore for years. And yet, despite everything, Lauren kept the engagement ring, an act that Miller describes as the final insult, not because of its monetary value, but because of what it represented to him: a promise broken under false pretenses. After their breakup, Lauren's life continued to evolve rapidly. She dated other NFL stars, got engaged to actors, married a Hollywood power agent, and eventually entered the orbit of Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, whose personal and professional empire made him one of the richest men in the world. Their relationship became public in 2019 under dramatic circumstances, with private messages and photos leaked to tabloids, sparking controversy and ending both of their previous marriages. The source of the leak was allegedly Lauren's own brother, a betrayal that grabbed headlines and added fuel to an already explosive media moment. Miller says he watched this unfold with mixed emotions. On one hand, he felt empathy for Lauren for being betrayed by family, but on the other hand, it reminded him of the patterns he had seen in their past and the moments when she had not been honest with him. The difference now was the scale. This was not just about a relationship, it was about reputations, legacies, and billions of dollars. As the media began to frame Lauren's relationship with Jeff as a modern fairy tale, Miller remained silent, but increasingly unsettled by the public narrative being shaped. He says it was not about revenge, but about telling his truth. Finally, after more than 20 years of silence, Miller shared his perspective, saying he had never fully trusted Lauren because of how different she acted when she was not with him. He describes her as attentive and loving in person, but evasive and secretive when apart, and the diary, he says, proved it was not in his head now. With Lauren preparing to marry again and step into global fame alongside Jeff Bezos, Miller has chosen to tell his story not to harm but to add context, a part of the story that has not been publicly heard before. He talks about the impact of being in love with someone he now believes was living a different life than the one she showed him. He talks about how that experience shaped his view on trust, and how even after all these years the memories have stayed with him, especially as he watches the world celebrate a version of Lauren that he does not recognize. He remembers the signs, the doubts, the inconsistencies, and now with the wedding around the corner, he is asking whether history is repeating itself. He does not claim to know what Jeff Bezos knows about Lauren's past, but he believes that truth matters, and that understanding the past can help make sense of the present. This is not a smear campaign, and it is not a bitter ex seeking the spotlight. It is one man's account of a relationship that once meant the world to him, and the ways in which he felt deceived, hurt, and eventually silenced. For Miller, the story is not just about Lauren or Jeff, it is about how we understand people, how we form relationships, and how sometimes what glitters in the spotlight hides a much more complicated truth underneath. He admits he was not perfect in the relationship and that he stayed silent for a long time, partly to protect Lauren and partly because he wanted to move on. But with the world now watching her every move, he felt it was finally time to share what had been left unsaid. He emphasizes that he does not want to change anyone's opinion, just to provide a fuller picture and allow others to draw their own conclusions. And for Miller, closure does not come from headlines or responses, but from finally letting go of the weight he has carried for so long, the emotional burden of loving someone who he now believes was not who she seemed to be, and the ache of watching that person be celebrated for a version of themselves he never got to see now as Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sánchez prepare to tie the knot in what is being dubbed one of the most expensive weddings of the decade. Anthony Miller's voice has quietly entered the room. It is not the loudest voice, but it may be one of the most important because every story has layers and sometimes the parts we do not hear are the ones that explain the most for audiences watching this unfold. It is worth remembering that every public figure has a private past, and every relationship leaves behind pieces that do not always fit neatly into a headline. Whether you believe Miller or not, his story raises questions that deserve to be asked about trust, about truth, and about the stories we choose to believe. And if nothing else, it reminds us that behind every perfect picture there is often a past waiting to be understood. So what do you think about Anthony Miller's decision to speak now? After all these years, do you think Jeff Bezos is aware of the full history? Or is he about to marry someone with a past that still has unresolved chapters? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below and make sure to subscribe for more stories that go beyond the headlines to reveal the truth behind the image. As the spotlight continues to shine on Lauren Sánchez and Jeff Bezos with their wedding generating global buzz, there is another side to the glamorous headlines that is starting to surface. A quiet undercurrent of questions about past relationships, about patterns that never quite changed, and about the emotional toll that history can take when it is never fully acknowledged. Anthony Miller's decision to come forward after years of silence has sparked curiosity among viewers who wonder what it means when someone shares their story not for fame but for closure. He describes his relationship with Lauren as one that began with real feelings, shared dreams, and the hope of building a future together, but he also explains how over time those hopes were quietly eroded by actions he could not fully explain until it was too late. The emotional confusion he felt when Lauren acted one way in person and another when she was away left him questioning his own judgment, questioning whether he was being too paranoid or too sensitive. He says that looking back, he now knows his instincts were trying to tell him something that his heart refused to believe at the time. What makes this story resonate with so many is how relatable it is. Even though it involves public figures and high-profile relationships, it ultimately comes down to something deeply human: the need to feel safe in love, the longing for honesty, and the pain that comes when trust is broken. Miller recounts the moment he stumbled upon Lauren's diary not as an invasion of privacy but as a moment of accidental truth, one that shattered the illusion he had been holding onto for 4 years. He describes the betrayal as not just about the cheating itself but about the realization that the future he had been building was never real for Lauren in the way it was for him. The diary revealed a different reality, one filled with other relationships, other men, and a version of events that made him feel like a stranger in his own story. He says the emotional fallout from that moment stayed with him not just because of the betrayal but because of how deeply he had loved her and how hard he had worked to make things work even when his gut told him something was off. After the breakup, he heard more stories. People who had stayed silent during their relationship suddenly opened up. Friends shared things they had seen or heard, moments that now made painful sense. It felt like puzzle pieces finally clicking together. But instead of satisfaction, it brought heartbreak, the kind of heartbreak that does not fade easily, especially when reminders of the past are constantly in the news. For Miller, the engagement ring that Lauren kept after their breakup became a symbol of everything that went wrong. He had given it to her under pressure, trying to do the right thing even if his heart was not fully aligned, but she kept it. Even after the truth came out, even after the relationship ended, it was not just a piece of jewelry, it was a promise. And holding onto it felt like one more act of disrespect in a relationship that had already been fractured by secrecy and dishonesty. Years later, when Lauren moved on to other high-profile relationships, including her marriage to Hollywood power agent Patrick Whitesell, Miller says he hoped she had changed. He hoped the patterns would not repeat, and for a while it seemed like they had not. Lauren and Patrick appeared happy, raising children, attending industry events, and building a life that looked stable and loving. But then came the affair with Jeff Bezos, and once again Miller watched from afar as the woman he had once loved stepped into a new phase of life, this time on the front pages of newspapers around the world. The messages, the photos, the tabloid drama, and most shocking of all, the revelation that her own brother had been involved in leaking private texts to the media. It was a level of betrayal that mirrored what Miller had experienced on a smaller scale years before, and while he did not speak publicly at the time, he says it all felt hauntingly familiar. The same themes of secrecy, the same shift from public perfection to private chaos, the same emotional fallout playing out in a much bigger arena as Lauren and Jeff's relationship became more public, more celebrated, more romanticized. Miller says he began to feel a growing sense of unease Not because he resented their happiness, but because he believed the full story was not being told. He watched as Lauren was described in glowing terms as a woman in love, as a visionary partner, as someone who had transformed Jeff's life. And yet no one was talking about the history, the relationships that had ended before this one, the patterns that might still be present. Miller knew that his story was just one version of Lauren's past, but he believed it mattered, not because it defined her, but because it helped explain her and maybe even helped others understand what they were seeing now. When he decided to speak publicly, he did so with caution, not wanting to come off as vindictive or bitter, but simply as someone who had lived through something real and painful and who felt it was finally time to share his side. He acknowledges that Lauren has every right to find love again, to move on, to rebuild her life, but he also believes that people should go into relationships with open eyes and open hearts, and sometimes that means being willing to look at the full picture, not just the curated version that appears in magazines. Miller's story is not just about betrayal, it is about what happens when we ignore our instincts, when we allow ourselves to believe in a version of love that asks us to silence our doubts. He talks about how he tried to make things work, how he rationalized Lauren's behavior, how he convinced himself that maybe he was just imagining things, and how painful it was to realize that he was not. The truth was there, all along, hiding in plain sight, waiting to be acknowledged. And even now, decades later, that truth still matters, especially as Lauren prepares to marry one of the most powerful men in the world. Miller says he is not trying to stop the wedding, he is not trying to ruin anything, he just wants to tell the truth, because for too long, that truth has been missing from the conversation. He believes that honesty matters, and that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is share our story, even if it is painful, even if it is inconvenient, even if it goes against the image others want to believe. As audiences continue to watch Lauren and Jeff's story unfold, filled with private jets, designer gowns, and fairy tale backdrops, Miller's voice stands in quiet contrast, a reminder that real life is messy, that love is complicated, and that the truth has a way of resurfacing no matter how long it takes to be heard. So, what do you think about this part of the story? Should the past be left in the past, or does it deserve a place in the present conversation? Tell us what you think in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that reveal the human side behind the headlines, as Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sánchez continue to make headlines with their extravagant wedding plans, private yacht excursions, and front row appearances at luxury fashion events. Another quieter story is unfolding in the background, a story that challenges the fairy tale image being presented to the world and instead offers a look at the emotional history behind the woman now standing next to one of the richest men alive. Anthony Miller, the former NFL wide receiver who once spent 4 years in a serious relationship with Lauren Sánchez, has opened up about his past, not to relive pain but to finally let go of it. He says the silence was never about forgetting, it was about trying to move on. But as the spotlight grew brighter around Lauren, the contrast between who he once knew and who the world now sees became too stark to ignore. In his words, "It is not about revenge or drama, it is about truth." Miller says their relationship began like most relationships do, full of hope, excitement, and the feeling that anything was possible. Lauren was young, ambitious, beautiful, and already beginning to carve out a name for herself in the world of sports media. They met in 1996 and quickly became inseparable. Their careers complemented each other, their energy aligned, and for a while it felt like something real. But according to Miller, there were cracks forming early on, cracks that he now sees more clearly than ever. He talks about the emotional imbalance in the relationship, how he often felt like the one investing more both financially and emotionally. He says Lauren rarely spent her own money, preferring that he cover things like dinners, trips, and even small daily expenses. He says that while she appeared affectionate in public, there was always a part of her that felt distant, reserved, and hard to truly reach. He noticed how she changed depending on the company she was in, and how hard it was to get a consistent answer when she was away from him or returning from long work trips. There were guarded texts, quick explanations, and moments that made him feel like he was on the outside of his own relationship. For a long time he thought he was imagining it, that maybe he was insecure or overthinking, but then came the day he found her diary, and everything he had suspected became painfully real. According to him, the diary detailed multiple affairs, descriptions of other men, and private moments that made it clear Lauren had not been honest with him about where she had been or who she had seen. The words hit him hard, like emotional whiplash, confirming that the woman he had been planning a life with was living a separate life entirely. He says he confronted the truth quietly and chose to walk away rather than ignite public scandal. He hoped Lauren would return the engagement ring, a symbol of the future he had once believed in. But she never did, and that act became symbolic of how differently they viewed their time together. He wanted closure, she wanted control over the narrative. Miller says he left the relationship heartbroken but determined to keep his dignity. He chose not to speak publicly even as Lauren went on to date more high-profile men, and eventually married Hollywood agent Patrick Whitesell. They appeared happy, raising a family and sharing a public image that suggested stability and success. But then came 2019, and the explosive headlines that confirmed for Miller that the patterns had returned. Lauren was in the middle of a media storm after news broke of her affair with Jeff Bezos while both were still married. It was not just a scandal. It was a worldwide spectacle. The National Enquirer published intimate texts and photos that had reportedly been leaked by Lauren's own brother Michael Sanchez. For Miller, the entire situation felt eerily familiar, not just the betrayal but the layers of secrecy and the way Lauren seemed to shift depending on who was watching. The difference now was that the stakes were global and the damage much wider. Miller says he watched with empathy and concern, recognizing the same traits that had once fractured their relationship now playing out on an international stage. He says the betrayal by a sibling must have been devastating, and in some ways he sympathized, but he also could not ignore the undeniable similarities between then and now. Lauren once again was being portrayed as a powerful woman in control of her destiny, but Miller believes that part of that control involves shaping narratives that do not always reflect the full truth, and that is why he is speaking now, not to cast judgment, but to make sure that the story includes all the parts, not just the glossy ones. He says he understands that people change and grow and that everyone deserves a second chance, but he also believes that when patterns repeat across decades, they should be examined, not hidden. As Lauren and Jeff move toward marriage, Miller wonders if the foundation is truly different this time or if the same emotional walls he once faced are still in place. He says the world sees Lauren as glamorous, polished, successful, and beautiful, but he also remembers the side of her that made him doubt himself, that made him question his own instincts, and that ultimately left him feeling emotionally depleted. Now, as Lauren is celebrated on magazine covers and red carpets, Miller's voice offers a more grounded reflection on what it means to be with someone who knows how to charm a crowd but can leave the people closest to them questioning everything. Miller says that his reason for speaking out is rooted in the hope that sharing real experiences can help others recognize the signs in their own lives. He says he is not perfect and he does not claim to be the ultimate authority on who Lauren is today, but he knows who she was with him, and he believes that truth matters, especially when the stakes are so high. He points to the romantic texts between Lauren and Jeff that were leaked in 2019, messages filled with passion and longing that became public fodder, but for him, they were reminders of a dynamic that once captivated him too, only to later unravel into doubt, secrecy, and betrayal. He says that the public celebration of their love story overlooks how it began in secrecy, and how patterns of infidelity can sometimes be hidden behind money, power, and fame. Miller says that if Jeff Bezos truly knows all of Lauren's past, then he wishes them well, but if he does not, then he hopes. This story serves as a wake-up call, a moment of reflection before promises are made that might not be built on complete honesty. Ultimately, this is not just about Jeff and Lauren, or about Anthony Miller and his broken engagement. It is about how we as a society often glamorize love stories without questioning the chapters that came before them. It is about how easily we can fall for surface-level perfection, while ignoring the emotional realities that shape the people we admire so much. So what do you think about the continuation of this story? Do you believe people can truly change? Or do you think the past always finds a way to resurface? Tell us what you think in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe for the next part of this story that dives even deeper into the truths behind the headlines. As the wedding between Lauren Sánchez and Jeff Bezos draws closer with international media following their every move and fans dissecting every outfit, every venue, and every Instagram post, there is one voice that remains steady outside the whirlwind of glitz and glamour. The voice of Anthony Miller, not seeking revenge, not begging for attention, but offering something far more powerful: perspective. His story is not tabloid fodder, it is a lived experience, an emotional journey that never made headlines until now, a relationship that spanned for years and ended not just in heartbreak, but in revelation. Miller says the hardest part of watching Lauren become a global celebrity is not the fame, not the money, not even the wedding, but the rewriting of her past. As if none of it ever happened, as if she had not once been engaged to a man who genuinely loved her, only to be left in the shadows while she built her narrative around reinvention and upward mobility. He recalls moments from their relationship that feel frozen in time, the shared laughter, the quiet nights, the small gestures that made him believe what they had was real, but beneath that surface were constant red flags, small lies that grew into bigger secrets, behaviors that made him feel like He was always playing catch-up emotionally. He says that whenever she left town or went on assignment, he felt this gnawing sense of anxiety, not jealousy, just something he could not explain until the truth came out, that she had been unfaithful repeatedly and without remorse. When he found her diary, he says it was like reading a completely different version of their relationship, one where he was not the partner but just one of many players in a carefully managed story. What stunned him most was not just the cheating but the casual way it was written about, as if it had no weight, no consequence, as if it was simply part of how she navigated relationships. To this day, he says he does not believe Lauren ever truly loved him in the way he loved her, and that realization still stings, not because he wants her back, but because he spent years trying to make sense of something that was never really honest to begin with. And now, as he sees her embraced by billionaires, celebrated by fashion houses, and hailed as a symbol of power, he cannot help but feel like the truth is being left behind again. He says people look at her and see beauty, style, charisma, but they do not see the patterns, the way she seeks out men with power and status and then exits just as quietly when the next opportunity arises. Miller watched this unfold again when Lauren began a relationship with Jeff Bezos while still married to Patrick Whitesell, her husband of more than a decade, a man who had helped her build a glamorous life in Hollywood and who, by all accounts, was blindsided by the affair. The way the media portrayed that relationship made Miller uneasy. It was framed as a love story, destiny, even to soulmates finding each other against all odds, but the reality was messier. Both Lauren and Jeff were married at the time their affair began, and the scandal that erupted when their private texts were leaked showed just how complicated and hurtful that chapter truly was, not just for their exes but for their families, their children, and their reputations. Miller says he watched it unfold not with bitterness but with an eerie sense of deja vu, like he had seen this movie before, just on a smaller scale, and now it was playing on a global screen with millions watching. And yet the deeper truths were still hidden beneath designer gowns, yacht parties, and carefully curated interviews. He says Jeff Bezos may believe he has found the love of his life, but he wonders if Jeff knows what it is like to feel that something is off, but not be able to explain it. If he has ever asked himself why Lauren guards her phone so tightly, or why her stories sometimes shift depending on who is listening. He says these are the little things that started to wear him down over time, the feeling that he was always one question away from an answer that would hurt, and yet he loved her and tried to overlook those feelings, hoping they would fade, but they never did. And now he watches history possibly repeating itself, only this time with far more at stake. And what frustrates him is not just that Lauren may be hiding parts of her past, but that the world is helping her do it by treating her like a blank canvas, instead of a complex human being with real choices, real consequences, and a very real pattern of behavior. He says he is not trying to sabotage her happiness or ruin her wedding, but he believes that when someone enters into a marriage, they deserve to know the full truth, not just the parts that make a good Instagram caption. Because love without honesty is just performance, and performance eventually fades. He admits that telling his story has not been easy. It brings up memories he had long buried, emotions he thought he had moved past, and vulnerabilities he rarely shares. But he also says that speaking now has given him a sense of clarity that silence never could. He feels like he finally said what needed to be said, not to change the past, but to make peace with it, and to warn others that sometimes even the most beautiful love stories are built on shaky foundations, and that truth, even when it is uncomfortable, is the only thing strong enough to hold a future together. He says he wishes Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sánchez well, but hopes they have done the hard work of honesty before they walk down the aisle, because if not, no amount of money, no lavish ceremony, no headlines can protect them from the kind of pain that comes when trust collapses from the inside out. And as this new chapter begins for Lauren, with the world cheering her on, Miller's voice remains steady in the background, a quiet but necessary reminder that behind every perfect picture is a history, and sometimes that history has a voice that deserves to be heard. So what are your thoughts? Do you think Miller's story deserves more attention, or should the focus stay on Lauren's future rather than her past? Let us know in the comments below. And make sure you are subscribed for the final part of this emotional journey, where we explore what happens when the past and present collide in the public eye.